great to be here with you, Satya.
Thank you
We
so
did
much.
this a couple of years back.
That is right, and this has become our annual thing, and I'm really glad to be back in Bangalore with you, and it's wonderful.
You know, one thing I was thinking, the last 2 years, there's been an exponential rate of change. And, every day we get up and something new is happening. How do you deal with that, and how do you deal with what do you think is coming now?
Yeah, I mean, I think this entire industry, in fact, backstage we were talking about this. The last, 35 years that I've been in this industry, the thing that has powered us is this Moore's Law.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just been the most unbelievable empirical observation, right? We call it a law, but it's really an empirical observation that is held true for a long period of time. And I remember distinctly, like we used to have these, he bills to get the top Microsoft folks every year, and he would do only one thing. He would just put a chart. He would just show us Moore's Law. He would say, here's what's happening with memory. Go fill it with software. That was sort of the instruction, right? That was basically what we've been doing all these decades. Right. And then comes this AI revolution, and it fundamentally accelerates because we were all bemoaning the fact that, oh my God, Moore's Law is maybe ending, or it's not like the same as before. And then here is one algorithmic breakthrough, DNNs. Here is sort of the GPUs and AI accelerators now. And you put those things together, what was an 18-month doubling has become a 6-month doubling.
Wow.
Right? So you can think about it, right? Which is, we were already on a fast pace, and now we've done it 6 months. And now you have another thing, this inference time compute.
Is this Nadella's law?
Well, I think I'll avoid naming anything, except I just want to ride the wave. And so that is sort of the change. But the question you asked is the interesting one, right? Which is, I think, a little bit of where what's going to be the phase shift going forward is. I don't think we're going to be sitting here next year, the year after, admiring either, quite frankly, the Moore's Law or the new Moore's Law, or even the LLMs or the models. It will be what we're doing with all that abundance. Yeah. Because the interesting thing is, I go back to that Bill's statement, right, which is fill it with software. And so it goes back to what do people in this room and everywhere else do with it, right? If there's going to be an abundant commodity, you don't sit there and pray to the abundant commodity. You use it. That's right. It's kind of like when Excel came out, we didn't say, oh my God, here is an Excel spreadsheet. Let's sort of put a murti of it and play. We just said, let's create spreadsheets.
That's right.
And I think that's what's going to happen and that's, I think, how we as humans will understand to manage the change.
Sure.
And so one of the things that brings for me, Nandan, is, you and I just talked briefly backstage even. You take all this, contextualize it for me in India. Like how does this apply to the Indian economy and Indian society broadly?
Totally. I think India will be the use case capital of AI in the world. I think we have a number of things working for us. One is, I think we have 15 years of experience in building population scale digital infrastructure, which we know how to make it work, cheap, high volume, billions of transactions, all that stuff. So we know that game. We have a political leadership which is very tech savvy. I know you met from Prime Minister Modi yesterday. And they understand that we have to strike the right balance between AI innovation and safeguards. Because in some parts of the world, they're saying safeguards first, without worrying about the innovation. So I think we know the right balance between responsible AI and innovation. And we have a population which has learned to accept technology. I mean, when you think about it, UPI was launched about 7 years back. Now 400 million users, 16 billion transactions a month. I mean, unbelievable this can happen, right? So I think AI is at that spot. We have to make it work. And we're already seeing early signs. For example, if you look at Aadhaar authentication, it's all AI based because we had to do liveness detection for biometrics so people don't spoof it. Sure. It's all AI based. If you look at our tax systems, backend is all AI, figuring out who's doing fraud and all. That's why tax revenues are going up. So I think India is now ready for that, and we are going to see many, many applications coming. So I think this is the place for you to see this stuff working at population scale.
No, 100%. I mean, that's why we are very, very, very excited about, our investments here. We see like the combination you said, it's a pretty unique place where you have this virtuous cycle between the entrepreneurial energy, the government sort of yojanas, the India stack, and then the population scale. So you add those four things into a virtuous cycle, like the UPI or Aadhaar, or now what's going to happen in education and in health and what have you. I don't think there is a place where the at-scale benefits. So in an interesting way, in the past people talked about this convergence, right, between developing countries and developed countries. In an interesting way, this abundance of tokens can probably reduce that convergence.
Oh, I think in many ways it's a leapfrog. I think in many of these areas you're going to see leapfrog, because the advantage of no legacy is you can leapfrog. So I think that's going to happen. But it'll have to be at, have to be efficient. I think inference costs have to be super frugal, because if you're going to have 1 billion people doing, all kinds of queries or agentic stuff, it has to work at that scale. So I think there's a lot, but I see it happening. But you meet, and so do I, but we meet a lot of CEOs. They're all excited, but little, what to do next. What is your advice to global CEOs?
Yeah, I think the fundamental challenge is that first question you asked, which is change management, right? So if you think about it, when the PCs first came out, right? In fact, I met the CEO of Generali, which is in Italian,
Milan.
So he started, an insurance company, and he was telling me about how in the early 80s when he started, he'd have to go ask for permission to send a fax. So I said, it must have been some compliance issue. He says, no, it was not a compliance issue. It was like expensive to send a fax. And then PCs came out, right? And then you could literally say, okay, let me put an attachment in an email and send it. And it changed the entire process of how his agent brokers and them communicated. Same thing, take forecasting, right? How did forecasting happen in a multinational company like ours? Pre-PC, right? I mean, faxes went around, somebody then did an inter-office memo, and then eventually 3 months later you had a forecast. Whereas then suddenly there was a new workflow, which was email attachments in an Excel spreadsheet. So I think that process change, right? When I think about what's happening even with Copilot and agents inside a Copilot as the UI layer, it's a new workflow. And so the work process has to change. So good old, in the mid-90s, we used to talk about business process re-engineering. It's back again. Where you got to go look at how does any process, right, happen today, and you got to re-engineer. So that means it's moving the cheese around a little bit. And so that change management is the hard thing. But then let me give you an example, even just at Microsoft. When I look at my marketing efficiency of dollars spent, double digit, customer service, double digit. Internal IT ops, double digit, right? So you take any one of these, so I'm putting that right into my budget. So as a CEO, what I do is I literally say, okay, 10 points or 100 basis points of operating leverage next year, and then go take that for the next 5 years. You compound it, right? So that means if that's going to be what the efficient frontier of any company is, and once that is in the water, every CEO has to wake up and say, because after all, thanks to capital markets, what they expect of CEOs is miracles every 90 days. And so, so if you don't produce that miracle.
Well, you're one of those who actually delivered every 90 days. But I think, we see it because we are probably one of the world's largest users of Copilot on GitHub. You can see the impact already, but it's not just about technology, it's about process improvement, it's about training people, it's about changing mindsets, the whole human issue that have to deal with it. But I think this is something which will take off. But one thing which people are, I think, I remember in the early days of the last 2 years, there was this huge hype about AI will rule the world and all that. But that seems to have died down. And I think people are realizing that responsible AI can be done with innovation. So what's your take on all that?
I think that there, multiple things there, right? There's two sets of, if I sort of had to characterize what's the big debates today, one debate is, of course, hey, are the scaling laws still working? Right, because, and I'm a believer that the scaling laws are working. It's just that, with scale, even things become harder. So pre-training, as you scale, becomes harder because there's data challenge which you have to overcome. Just even cluster size. I mean, it's a massive distributed. This workload, which is a synchronous data parallel workload, is unlike anything we have seen before too. So even the systems problems are unique. So there's pre-training itself. Then there is post-training, or you could say inference time compute, which essentially is, if you take even pre-training, there's a massive sampling piece to it. We now have a better way to do that with all this chain of thought, inner monologue, and auto-grading it and what have you. So therefore, I think we'll continue to see some good algorithmic and systems innovation. So I feel good about that. Then that same capability that's being used to produce capabilities in the model is what is needed for safety as well.
Okay.
So when you think about guardrails, reasoning, when I think about reasoning, when you can when you can do the sampling, look at the chain of thought, auto-grade it, that's the best way to do alignment in some sense.
So you think some of this hallucination stuff will come down?
Hallucination, like for example, one of the services I'm most excited about even in Azure is this grounding service, right? So you can kind of use AI to check AI, how grounded it is, right? So I think one of the frontiers right now will be a lot of how good are we at our evals for performance, evals for groundedness, evals for safety. And I think that the state of the art is moving. Quite frankly, like one of the other things if you remember, every platform shift has had both the core system, but also a core app server that we built, whether it is for the web or mobile. And now we have a full-blown app server that we're building in our case called Foundry, on everything. How do I do fine-tuning? How do I do evaluation? Yeah. How do I do safeguards? And that way, I think, so that application developers don't have to recreate it.
And you made this famous statement that SaaS is gone or dead or something?
No. That's kind of what the social media says I said. I didn't say that. But what I said is, like all things, the application architecture is changing, right? So it's kind of like saying, did applications change with relational databases? Absolutely. I mean, if you remember, when I started even, it was in the beginning of relational databases.
SQL and all
that. Yeah, and so, but the bottom line is before that, everybody built a vertical database inside the app.
That's right.
So basically, they said, here's a B tree, let me build it in. And that was sort of the state of the art. And then suddenly said, we can have the separation between a database and have SQL, and then I can have the app logic. So right now with agents, what's going to happen is a lot of the business logic will get separated. So in some sense, there's going to be databases which you can do CRUD operations on. And then you will sort of even manage eventual consistency between multiple of these SaaS backends. But a lot of the business logic will move to a new tier, which then will be a multi-agent tier that needs to be orchestrated. So it's going to be I'm not going to one SaaS application to another SaaS application. So I'm going to go to an agent that will orchestrate across multiple SaaS applications. So it's going to be a very big change. That's why I think of this Copilot as the UI for AI. Like for example, just to give you a real world feel, I just go to Copilot every day to get to my dynamic CRM. Okay. I never go to dynamic CRM because all I go is at sales, give me what's happening with Infosys and Microsoft and how are we working.
Doing well.
Yeah, and it'll come back with, by the way, not just data inside the CRM system, but in all the communications Salil and you and I may have had, I get back. Okay. So that ability to aggregate for a user query information across the front office system or a productivity system, a back office system, multiple of them, that's an agentic behavior that I think is going to be fairly disruptive in how users use things.
No, I agree with you. I think agents will really now drive enterprise consumption. I think because it's very easy to tell a CEO that we can create an agent, he can be a digital worker, he can amplify human potential. I think it's easy also to communicate, and I think that's going to be a big thing. And I think this year will be a big.
Yeah, it's kind of like humans and the swarm of agents.
Yeah.
That I think is the next frontier, as you rightly pointed out, and that's where I think a lot of the productivity will come from, right? Yes. Which is the operating leverage for any function will come where the agents, just like I say, and by the way, the creation of agents today, people mystify it. And there will always be. There will be the high end of, what's the specific agent about. But just like I can build a spreadsheet, I will build thousands, hundreds of agents that are working to help me streamline my own workflow.
And how do you see, we obviously have seen the consumer AI stuff, but how do you differentiate enterprise AI from consumer AI?
I think the biggest one is obviously entitlement. So if I sort of think about today, what's the next big thing? We talked about agents. In order for agents to work, memory and tools use, right? So basically you have a very sophisticated model, let's say, which is more capable. You then have to be able to give it a lot of context. And the context is in memory, but also what tools to use for what tasks. And so if you can post-train essentially a model, or inside of the model's invocation, there is tools used built in and memory is provided. That's where, and that, by the way, requires entitlements, right? So that means one of the other things that we're working very, very hard on, in fact, data governance and entitlements, because agents can't work without scoping, just like humans.
And security will be a big deal here. You don't want the rogue agents roaming around. Yeah.
That's right. So you have entitlements, memory, and tools use. And that, I think, is going to really change, I think, enterprise infrastructure, enterprise application tier, and enterprise usage.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think one of the advantages of Azure is that because you're led from the front on consumption of AI on Azure, the learnings you have of what an AI workload looks like and how to design a cloud for that, I think is unparalleled.
Yeah, and then two points there, right? Most people talk about AI as if it sits in isolation.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, if you look at inside even ChatGPT happens to be like the biggest users of Azure search.
Yeah.
Right?
Really?
After all, I mean, vector search is a big part. So it happens to be one of the biggest users or the biggest users of Cosmos DB, because after all the user state still, by the way, it's like agentic stuff is stateful, right? So therefore you need databases. So any AI application, in fact, needs all the other sort of services we built. It doesn't sit on its own. And to your point, as a hyperscaler in general, and we understand the workload, that's why we're building the app server. And we're coming at it from two ends, Nandan. One is this Copilot as the UI for AI plus agents as extensions. And we're coming at it from infrastructure and an app server from the Azure side. So those are the two bookends for us. But quite frankly, we are building them out as platforms so that everyone in this room can start building on top of it. Right. Because to me, Microsoft has always been two things, a platform company and a partner company.
So your roots are in that. And
That's
I think
right.
you also create an ecosystem where everybody benefits, which
That's
is
right.
different. So, but last question, what is your call to action for all the CEOs here?
I think there are two calls, right? One is, I would say, the conversation you and I were having. I think there's more of a meta call, I think, from an India perspective, which is any country that gets ahead in building out, the new performance curve for me is tokens per dollar per watt, right? So tokens, so if you sort of really say, where is the infrastructure getting built in such a way that the ability to generate tokens per dollar spent per watt used is the most efficient? That, I think, is a countrywide, there's private sector, public sector, policy, there's so many elements to it. So that would be one call to action, right? Whenever, like our data centers, again, we just can't build data centers. Our data centers have to be permitted, then they have to have access to renewable energy. That renewable energy should be on a grid. So we require a lot of upstream investments in any country. Then on the other side is, there's a fantastic book by a guy called Jeffrey Ding, which is, I think it's called Technology and Great Powers and Competition. But fundamentally, he makes the argument that it's not about even building the leading technology, it's diffusing the leading technology and using it intensely that leads to great success.
That's right.
So it's kind of like the other side of it for all of us, quite frankly, including me, is not just to talk about AI, but is to use AI and diffuse it broadly inside the organization and have it make a material difference in your customer service, in your product development, in your internal operations. So I would say those would be the two.
Great. And I think you taught us something new. Software guys never thought of energy, but now we have to think about watts. So we'll do that.
That's right.
Thank you very much, Satya.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Nandan and Satya, what a fascinating conversation. But I want to bring the leaders in the room in. We've got a few minutes for an open Q&A.
I'm Saurabh Sahu, the CEO for Accenture in India. Considering it's a CEO connection session, just checking your thoughts. Would we have a day when we have an AI CEO?
Isn't it already here? No, I mean, I think that if you sort of if you had gone back and said, hey, we're going to create 1 billion people who can type, and we'll call it knowledge work, right? That's what we did with sort of what we did with the PCs and phones and essentially putting keyboards in front of people and touch screens in front of people to create information. So to some degree, I think about it, whether it's a CEO or a frontline worker, what I think we will have is these tokens that then work with our tokens. It's kind of a bit of I describe it as the new Jugalbandi, right? Think about a jazz session where AI and humans are able to create real leverage. I'll tell you, one of the most fascinating, even in my own personal behavior, my fear of stuff, the unknown, is just gone. Like, I mean, I'll give you, like, I was telling somebody, like, Puneet and I were talking about, God, how much of high school math do you use? I said, you know what, I recently relearned my, chain rule of probability. Because I said, shit, I might as well know that. That's the one thing to know if you really want to know the transformers. And the fact is that expertise is getting commoditized. Knowledge is more accessible. But that doesn't mean that the system of knowledge creation is going to be something that we don't have agency in. That, I think, is the key realization. So, it's not like I'm outsourcing my knowledge. I am using these tools to create more knowledge, and more knowledge turns. That subtle difference is, whether it's for a CEO or a frontline worker, is going to be the big change.
And I think you're raising a larger question. How do we all remain relevant, right? So I think it's by having two ends of the spectrum. On one side, empathy, collaboration, intuition, judgment, which you can't replace. On the other side, deal with first principles. If you have these two ends covered, the middle stuff will be in AI, but the two ends you have to deal with yourself.
And by the way, the one other nice metaphor, the CEO of Figma uses, which I like a lot, is it reduces the floor and raises the ceiling simultaneously. If you take anything and you say, wow, both those things are happening, it's a pretty empowering way to think about it.
Thanks a lot. Happy that we have my job still. So.
Rajiv, you want to go next, and then I'll come to you, sir.
Nandan and Satya, for extremely exhilarating conversation. India is going to be the AI use case capital of the world is a line I would like to plagiarize very often, if I may have the permission, please.
Please.
My question is the following. The last decade, and Puneet showed his digital life and his digital clerk life, but the last decade has been dictated by, let's say, social media as a technology. Lots of positives, but the one thing that came with social media was hashtag fact check. Mm-hmm. Because with so many people contributing, you don't know what's factual versus what's fictitious. AI, assuming that's going to be the next generation and the next decade reality, hashtag hallucination becomes a counter side to that. The more we contribute, the more all of us engage with AI, and the more that the AI learns, and agentic AI learns from all of these inputs. How do we deal with that kind of a reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think we briefly chatted about it. I mean, I think that there are two sides to it, right? One is, can you use AI itself essentially to do a lot more of that fact checking for you, right? I mean, there are, I would say, two practical things. If you sort of think about even our everyday habit now, any AI response, we are learning to be inspectors of it, right? Because it's a new skill. Like, it's kind of like the editor's skill is the new skill, not just the input skills that we have, right? Even like you take GitHub Copilot. It's sort of fascinating. What happens is when you do a continuation and it just comes, you fundamentally look at that code. And now a lot of the tools are about being able to explain this, explain it to me in multiple ways. And so even when you have an agentic suite, you are really going to use a lot more tools that you're going to build in order to be able to check the output. So that's sort of one side of it. The other side of it is, can you build, like, the real issue is when it starts doing sophisticated things that we don't even know about. It creates new science, let's say. How do you check that? And that, I think, is one of the frontiers of research, which is how do you really responsibly scale this such that our ability to make sure that the unintended consequences of this technology in the real world are things that we can deal with, right? I mean, that's the social media example, which is you don't spring something in the world and then it breaks and then you deal with it. You will have to responsibly learn how to scale this as a society. And I think that we as tech companies need to be grounded that that's how the social permission even will work. And so therefore we can't run ahead of our own ability to figure out how to responsibly scale it.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir. And then Mohit will come to you.
Thank you very much, Nandan. Two words you use, system of knowledge, and Nandan, you use first principle thinking. I think these are two things which is required for AI to get a granularity of input knowledge frames which can fed into the AI to get a target knowledge frame, which is the output to be there. So in a banking and financial sector, the issue is 90% is not right. It's 99% right. And that's the difference of 90 to 95% right, where the granularity of the knowledge which is available, AI is able to deliver. Primary AI is not able to deliver that beyond 92% kind of a accuracy, which is not applicable for actual application usage. But as a secondary application, it's possible. But what is the steps you are taking in making 90% to 97% or 98%?
Yeah, so I think that first of all, you kind of have to parse it out, right? So given the state of any frontier model at a point in time, you don't necessarily need to use it for something that has to be 100% accurate, right? I mean, like you can even use good old machine learning for something that actually can be solved, using that, right? So therefore, you don't need to use general purpose intelligence that has an error bound. So that's why I think of it as more an assist for what is knowledge work, right? Which is knowledge work does have error bounds. It has human error bounds. So can we improve and reduce, in fact, the human error bounds? I was, seeing, I think ICICI Lombard was sort of showing me an example of their insurance processing, the claims processing. I believe in India there's a pretty unique challenge where there is no standard even in how the claims come in. And today, whatever, it takes, multiple hours or maybe tens of minutes, and how they can reduce it. So just even reducing the human drudgery in inspection, that's where I would use the general knowledge. And then wherever you have something that is just more, can be on rails, I would even use traditional means. And so that's one of the interesting things is the practical ways of using this technology are all now getting a lot more distributed, I would say.
Thank you, Satya Nandan. What a fascinating conversation. Thank you for pumping us up. And folks, thank you for being here. Lots more customer stories coming, lots more interesting conversations. So please do stay. But thank you, Satya.
Thank you
thank
so
you,
much.
Nandan.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nandan.
So good.
Always.
Thank you.
Thank you.